Right, thank you. Sorry about the day there, everybody. Hopefully you can all see your slides and the actual reports on your screen. So we'll start now the Planning and Environmental Protection Committee. Thank you very much, everybody, and good afternoon to you for attending. We're going to start with item 1, which is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Jones, and Councillor Jamil is attendance as substitute.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Jamil. Item 2 then is the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of June 2021, pages 3 to 12 in your reports. Can I take these as a true account? All agreed? Thank you. Item 3 is declarations of interest. None of those. Thank you. Item 4 is members' declaration of intention to make representations as the ward councillor. None of those. Thank you. To item 5 then. 5.1 relates to Cranmore House, Thorney Road I, pages 13 to 40 in your packs, and will be presented by Mrs. Brand when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. This first application relates to Cranmore House at Thorney Road in I, and it's for the erection of 25 dwellings and garages with a new access and public open space. Can I just check how the audio sounds? I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Sounds okay. Right, great. Thank you. The first slide shows the red line of the planning application. The site is within a predominantly residential area, and it comprises a large Victorian house and small holding, which are now in a derelict condition. To the east of the site is Alpine Lodge, a bungalow, and to the west of the site is a new estate of modern two-storey dwellings. Also to the east of the site, behind the bungalow, is an industrial premises known as Dalmark Seeds, which is an agricultural seed drying business. And then to the rear of the site, to the north, adjacent to the bypass, is 17 Easby Road, which has its rear garden area backing onto the application site. As you will see from the report, there has been quite a bit of planning history, both on the application site and the site to the rear. There have been a number of applications for residential use on this site, which haven't gained planning permission, but the most recent application in 2020 was only refused on the grounds of a lack of ecological assessment, and it's the purpose of this application to rectify that. Officers may have been supportive of the residential use at that time had the ecological assessment been overcome. The land to the rear at 17 Easby, that did receive planning permission and was allocated in the local plan, but time has elapsed and that permission has lapsed, and it had also not been carried forward into the current local plan. Therefore, the site is undesignated and does not benefit from planning permission. The application site, by contrast, has been included within the local plan and is an allocated site for residential development. The next few slides take you through, firstly, an aerial photograph, so you can see the extent of the site and its relationship with the adjoining uses. And then the photographs to follow show, firstly, the west of the access, where you can see the existing house that's been boarded up and the new estate further beyond. To the east, you can see the access and then the roof line of the bungalow, Alpine Lodge. We're then followed by some photographs within the site itself. You can see there some cars in this picture and the boarded up buildings. Again, further views into the rear of the site, the land beyond, including Dalmark Seeds, the properties on Millport Drive. Again, further photographs of that, an existing village building to be demolished, and then the rear elevation of Cranmore House. The next slide you should have shows the local plan allocation under policy LP 39, which covers the entire site. This slide shows the proposed layout, And you'll see that there are 7 detached dwellings proposed, 1 bungalow, 7 terraced dwellings, which are the properties in blue and grey to the east of the site, plot 18 to 24, and then 10 semi-detached properties, which are interspersed amongst the detached properties. It's a simple layout with an access from the main adopted highway, a single road with a turning head at the end, properties located on either side. As you'll see from your report under the section under noise, there is a reason for this particular layout. Dalmark Seeds is an industrial use. It does generate some noise, and the site has been laid out in this way in order to reduce the noise levels as far as possible. Therefore, the terrace properties to the east are essentially single aspect, with their main windows to the front looking out onto their own private garden area and parking spaces. There would be no windows to the rear at all. These would be blank elevations. And then the properties on the opposite side of the road, proposed plots 13 down to plot 1, they're designed in such a way as to have the majority of the bedrooms facing west, away from Dalmark Seeds. And incorporating those internal layouts, the single aspect nature of the terrace properties, they would also have a 2.5 metre high acoustic wall to the rear. Those all form part of the noise mitigation that make the scheme acceptable in those terms. The site also includes an area of public open space to the front of the site, next to the adopted highway. And at the far end of the site to the north, there is a turning head. You'll see that there are 2 parking spaces located at the end of that turning head. And members, I would just mention that we have had comments from the occupier of 17 Easby, who to the rear, objecting to the application as they consider those parking spaces would prevent the development of their land. Now, as I've mentioned before, their land does not have any planning status in terms of an allocation or a planning permission. I'd also just mention that we've had a late representation from those objectors who reiterate the same points that they've essentially made in their main objection. They are somewhat aggrieved about the local plan process, that they feel they weren't given the opportunity to respond to the call to sites, although this was made available to all landowners within the City Council area. But they also mentioned that they are still in discussion with the developers of this site in order to achieve a layout to their satisfaction with regard to their development interests, which is not something that you as a planning committee need to give consideration to. The next slide shows the elevations of plot 1, and that's then followed by a number of images showing the elevations to further plots. You can see the dwellings are proposed to be of a modern and yet traditional design in terms of the materials used. They would be brick with concrete tiles in terms of the roof materials. The slide entitled plots 18 to 24 shows you the elevations of the terraced properties, and also their floor plans, where you can see the bespoke nature of these dwellings with their main accommodation windows facing to the front. Plot 25 is the proposed bungalow. That's located close to the area of open space. And then finally, finishing off with some 3D views, giving the impression of what this development would look like once complete with landscaping. Got further views of the terrace properties. Okay, and that is where the presentation ends. Just some other things to bring your attention to. We've had, in terms of the the principle of development, the site is considered to be acceptable given that it's an allocated site within the local plan. We are satisfied with the design and layout and the impacts on neighbour amenity and also the amenity of future occupiers in terms of the noise impacts, subject to a number of noise mitigation conditions to achieve the mitigation measures that I described earlier. In terms of access and parking, the proposed access is considered to be of an acceptable width, dimensions, and sufficient car parking is provided. There would also be a number of conditions relating to the highway requirements that are attached to the recommendation. And I would also draw members' attention to the requirement for one further condition, condition 25, which would be on the basis that no dwelling should be occupied until details of certain highway improvements are achieved. These reflect the requirements of the Highway Authority as set out in the report, and in summary, that would be to achieve a 2-metre wide footway on Thorney Road to the west and east of the site, and that would mean that the footpath would connect to an existing footway to the west and to give connection to a bus stop to the east. 2 other highway improvements would be the removal of a redundant vehicular access and the reinstatement of curbs to a satisfactory height, and also to ensure that the new access, the new Bellmouth access, is designed to suitable visibility and curb radii standards as shown on the approved plans. Just going on to wildlife now. There is a requirement for mitigation to the loss of biodiversity on the site, and this developer is proposing a net biodiversity gain. They would therefore contribute to the creation of a grassland meadow at iGreen Local Nature Reserve, and they would also fund a contribution towards its maintenance. And a Section 106 agreement is required for that provision and also for the payment of the maintenance amount. Turning to trees, when you were on site, members noticed a line of Lelandii trees along the site and questioned whether they were in the application site or in the site of Dalmark Seeds. I can confirm that they are in the site of Dalmark Seeds, but also that the erection of the wall would not prejudice those Lelandii trees, nor would it be likely that there'd be a requirement for considerable maintenance to a brick wall in that location, and therefore access could be achieved as and when. I would also just like to point out that in terms of infrastructure, particularly affordable housing and public open space, that the applicant has submitted a viability assessment with the application because they consider that its scheme is not viable if it also was required to provide for affordable housing and public open space. Now, as we do with all such applications where this is put forward by a developer, we have those assessed by our planning obligations officer, so we carry out our own independent appraisal. And in this case, we have found that the numbers do stack up in the developer's favour, i.e. that it would not be a viable scheme if the additional requirements for affordable housing or public open space were provided. And therefore, for this application, these are not being submitted, and we as officers accept that submission, that the scheme would not be viable if they were provided. And then just finally, in terms of archaeology and drainage, these have been covered off by the developer and would be the subject of planning conditions, together with a condition requiring an investigation into contamination on the site. Therefore, in summary, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in the report, the additional condition that I mentioned, and also subject to a Section 106 agreement with regard to the provision of a grassland meadow and its maintenance at the local nature reserve. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bland. Well, we have nobody to address us this afternoon. So we'll go straight to any questions or clarity required of officers, please. Councillor Hogg.
So, just to clarify, that it was myself that brought up the question on the leylandised trees. If the trees are basically at the border of that property, if not maybe poking over with the new building, the sort of terrace of houses. Surely those trees will then basically be touching the building, and I was just trying to work out how and they will continue to grow presumably. How access will be arranged for being able to cut those back.
What would normally happen is that once a developer goes on site, they would take an accurate dimension of where their boundary is, and if the trees were already encroaching onto their site, they would make an arrangement with the landowner of the trees for them to be cut back so that there wouldn't be any touching, and then they would, just in the way that two property owners would do, make their own arrangements for the trimming back of those trees as and when it would be necessary. I think they're quite mature trees already, so it may be that they don't have a lot of additional growing to do. They're not being very young trees that are going to shoot up quite considerably. But it's not usually a sort of issue that we would tend to get involved with in the planning process at this stage. It would be something for the property owners to deal with.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question on the land to the north that you touched on. So I know you said that it's not something that can be considered as part of this. Can you just explain the background for me again to that in terms of why we should ignore that? Because there have been comments come through this morning in relation to us.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the comments that we received today have been reiterated by the objector throughout the course of the application, so they're not new and they are covered off in the report itself. But essentially, the owners of 17 Easby, they, under the previous local plan, that site was allocated for housing, and they also received planning permission for housing on there for 5 dwellings. Now, that allocation, that permission was never implemented. So it dated back to, I think it was 2014, and it's since fallen away because there's 3 years for planning permission to be implemented. They didn't implement it at that time. When it came to the 2019 plan being adopted, they didn't put the site forward for consideration as part of the local plan. So it doesn't have the benefit of either a planning permission or an allocation. And therefore that means that you shouldn't put any weight onto that site because it has no meaningful status. I mean, any intentions that the landowner has to submit a further application and to achieve access, they still perfectly entitled to carry on their own discussions with the developer of this site to see what they can arrange as to prospective developers. That again is quite a normal thing to do. So there are potentially ways and means of them overcoming that issue, but it's their private issue. It's not a planning issue at this point.
Okay. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So the map with the shaded yellow with LP 39.1, which shows the site in terms of the local plan, there is a kind of is it trapezium? It's been a long time since I've been to school and used such terminology, that seems to be attached to the site, whereas the site plan is quite clearly a flat surface. So is that trapezium that's kind of added onto, does that belong to this site? Does that belong to the other site, but is still part of the local plan? Can you just explain that to me, please?
Yeah, well, if you look... Yeah, if you were to look back at the red line, then the application is only within the red line. So I would say that trapezium is outside of that red line. It could well be it's not in the ownership of the current developers, and therefore they can't bring it forward. It just means that it's it'd be a small bit of land that is allocated, but effectively of not much use to anybody if it's not attached to either this site or the land at 17 Easby.
Okay, so my concern is that if that is in the local plan and it is part of the other site, are we open to them saying that we've closed off that, even though it's only a small slither of land? Are we open to the fact that we've closed that off by giving permission to this plan as it stands?
I wouldn't have said so, because there could be other means of accessing that site through the garden of 17 Easby, for example, and really it would be difficult to get any kind of meaningful housing on that very small trapezium shape of land, and it doesn't then mean that you can assume that it opens up the rest of the site. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was covered off, was the point. It's just...
Thank you. Anybody else? No? So are we going to go for some debate on it then? We'll move to debate as there's no questions. Councillor Hogg.
I think my questions have all been answered, if I'm being honest. I'm not overly not happy. What's the word? I don't think that the wall, the wall of houses is particularly pretty, and I'm not sure it would be somewhere I would like to live. But caveat emptor, as it were. I don't think that it's enough to say that we shouldn't be giving permission to this. I think it's important that we use land that is essentially brownfield sites where we can. We all know that we're in a shortage of housing opportunities within Peterborough. We're a growing city, and we need to find more and more places to place more and more housing. And for that reason, that this site is one that is one that should go forward. As has been said, it's not without its problems, and hence the reason for not being able to put forward an affordable housing proportion. But I do think that it's something that needs, that should go forward. So I'm happy to support officers' recommendations and let this one through.
Thank you. Councillor Jamil.
Yeah, I broadly support Councillor Hogg's proposal, and I'll second it. I did have some concerns about the terraced housing, but I can understand why they've done that. And for that reason, I'm quite satisfied that, it's the best of a bad job, as they say. So I'm quite happy for this to go through with officer recommendation.
Anybody else want to join the debate? Councillor Hiller.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. It's not an easy site. I think we all recognise that. It's an allocated site, so it's pretty much a presumption that something will go on there, whether it's right or wrong in design terms. I think it's a subjective opinion. Our officers are satisfied with the layout and the design. I've seen no reason to refuse this. I see no reason to reject it, Chair. I think it's the best of layout that could probably go on there. The other land and its potential development is unconnected to this. Physically might be connected, but unconnected from a planning point of view. So I think that's a little bit of a red herring, and I would be supportive of our officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hiller. Councillor Brown.
I think you should going to look very nice, because I've lived in Eye for 30 odd years and it's been an absolute scrapyard. So to put houses like that on it would be a lot better than it has been.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Yeah.
No more? No. So, do I have a proposer then, or proposal? Councillor Hogg, would you like to submit that?
I'm happy to support this application for it to go through with the conditions that have been laid out by officers.
Good, fine. Councillor Jamil, would you like to second?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. So we have a proposal and it's been seconded. So we'll go to the vote. All those in favour? That's a unanimous decision, so the application is approved. Thank you. Just give you a minute to set up for the next one. All set up. Already? Okay. Okay, then we'll move on to the next item, which is item 4.2, and relates to 71 Elmfield Road in Peterborough, and will be presented this afternoon by Mr. Ali. You ready?
Thank you, Chair. The application site is 71 Elmfield Road in Dogshope. The proposal is for a single-storey front porch and a single-storey rear extension. If we just move on to the next slide. It shows the location plan of the site. Elmfield Road is generally a residential area. To the east of the site is number 69 Elmfield Road, and to the west of the site is number 73. If we just move on to the next slide, please. This is a more close-up view of the site. The blue star indicates the application site. You've got parking provision to the front, and as members observed on site, there's a large existing garage/outbuilding along the western shared boundary with number 73, which is approximately 11 meters in length. If we just move on to the next slide, please. This is the existing ground floor plan. And the next slide shows the existing elevations. This is the proposed ground floor plan. So you've got the rear extension would measure just over 8 meters in depth and just over 4.54 meters in width. It would abut against the existing garage building. The porch would measure 1.79 meters by 1.79 meters. If we just move on to the next slide. Yep. So the proposed front porch would have a mono pitch with a Velux roof light, and the proposed rear extension will be a flat roof structure. On site there's an existing single-story element, and the flat roof will be just beyond the eaves height of that single-story element. If we move on to the next slide, thank you. So the dashed line on the right-hand side shows the profile of the existing garage or outbuilding in relation to the proposed rear extension. The height of the existing garage building is approximately 2.9 meters at its highest point. The height of the proposed rear extension is 3.1 meters. If you want, next slide. So this is just a cross-section of the proposed rear extension against the existing single-story rear element on site, just showing the eaves height of the existing and the flat roof, the extent of the flat roof of the proposed. Next slide, please. This is just the existing and proposed block plans, just showing the extent of the porch and the rear extensions. Next slide. Yep. This is just a photo of the application site. You've got number 73 on the right-hand side and number 69 on the left-hand side. This is just a view towards the west, looking towards Dogshope Road. If we move on to the next slide, yep. And this is looking east, as members could observe on site as well. You've got a mix of material finishes and building forms in the immediate and surrounding area. Next slide, yeah. This is is a photo of the rear of the site. So you've got the existing single-story element in the lighter brick. And on the right-hand side is number 69. You can just about see the glazed extension or conservatory element of number 69. Yeah, next slide. This will be the view from the proposed location of the single-story rear extension towards number 73, Elmfield Road. Next slide. Just to summarize, we received no comments from any neighbours with regards to the application. The update report did include a statement from the agent, but most of the material considerations, or all the material considerations raised within that statement were addressed in the officer report. With regards the material considerations for this application, that'd be to design and character of the site and surrounding area and neighbour amenity. With regards the front porch, officers are of the view that given the scale and size of the front porch, as well as the matching materials proposed, there'd be no adverse impact on neighbour amenity or design and character with regards to the front porch. With regards the single-story rear extension, officers are of the view that there's no adverse impact with regards design and character in the area, but given the size, scale, depth, and the close relationship with number 69 Elmfield Road, officers are of the view that it would result in an adverse impact on the living conditions and the main garden area of number 69 Elmfield Road. Therefore, the proposal will be contrary to policy LP17, and so the officer recommendation is one of refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. We have a Mr. Amin, please, who's going to address us today. That's it. Welcome, Mr. Amin.
Thank you very much.
You will have 5 minutes when you're ready to address committee.
Yep, thank you. So I'm Ruhul Amin, and I'm representing our case from myself and on behalf of my wife, Julie Amin. So I know I prepared a space from both of us, and a lot of this were already included in the report. So I'm not going to read out all of this, also because of the time as well. So I would just like to highlight a couple of points, and hopefully you'll get to see that why I'm here today. So we love Peterborough and also the area that we live in. I've got 2 young children. They're very well settled in their school, doing really well, and also in the mosque as well. Both for my wife and myself, the community, the local community is a great deal for us. So for example, during the whole pandemic, we were the designated shoppers for 2 elderly families who had to shield. And we always look for opportunities how we can volunteer on a regular basis. This is just to point out that why we'd like to live in this community and why we love this house. So our house got 3 bedrooms, and given that I work in Cambridge, so since the pandemic, I've been working from home on a permanent basis. So I've been using one of the bedroom as a study and office, and I believe that what I get from my work, I'll continue to do so for some time, which means that my son and daughter, they're now 8 and 9. We are quite desperate to move them into their own rooms, and which leaves me with no office area or study area to work in. So we kind of looked at that, what do we do, how we solve this problem. And I think the other important consideration why we wanted to sort of look into this extension was my wife. Her mother is got advanced Parkinson, so she's got disability. So it makes my wife really sad that she cannot offer her any downstairs toilet facility. So that excludes her spending this valuable time with our mother and also for the grandchildren. So we kind of worked with our architect to see how we can solve this problem. So the only solution that we can find is to convert the downstairs kitchen into an office and the downstairs toilet for my disabled mother-in-law, and then to extend out to create a kitchen and dining. Because for our culture, like friends and family, they're really valuable and important part of us. And at the moment, we cannot really accommodate them like for a big family gathering because of the downstairs space. So we consulted our adjoining neighbor at number 69, and the gentleman has been very supportive, and we talked to him about the plan that we were going to submit. So we submitted the proposed plan, and once we had feedback from our planning officer, so we worked with our architect to look at how else we can actually downsize that. So we reduced the height of the extension, and also we considered reducing the length of the extension as well, just the minimum that will make it a functional kitchen and dining for us, because we see this as our permanent home. Two other considerations were that our neighbor on the number 53 on the west, they just had their quite a large extension done, so we did not consider to demolish our garage because that will make a lot of disruption to their property, their newly built property. So we could not find any other solution just to downsize that to 7 meters in length so that we can keep the disruption to both sides of the neighbors to a minimum. So that wasn't kind of supported by our planning officer, so we consulted our local ward councillor, Councillor Yasin, and she advised that she will very much support us to come to this committee hearing because she saw that it was the best interest for our need, and also it wasn't making any adverse impact to our neighbors. So we've included 2 recent examples, and where we felt really let down.
There's 30 seconds left.
Okay. So we included 2 examples for number 53 and number 73, where their needs were accommodated, creating quite a large extension. So we felt really let down. So all I'd like to say is I'd like to have your support so that our applications can go through and we can live in a house in an area that we really love. And without that, I think all this is going to leave me with is no choice but to actually move house. So thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amin. Okay, any questions from any members of the committee? No, thank you very much, sir. Right, we'll go straight to questions to officers then. Any clarity required on anything? No? That was lucky. Okay, we'll go to debate then, please. Who would like to start debate on this one? Councillor Hiller and Councillor Bond.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have to say that was a very good address, a heartfelt address, and I'm sure genuine concerns and desire to live in what is your family home and an area that you like to live in. However, there are a number of planning considerations that we, as a committee, have to take into account. You, I'm sure, will be aware, as I'm sure your ward councillor will have explained it to you. It's an enormous extension, isn't it? In what is, with the greatest of respect, it is a relatively modest-sized house. This is a massive extension. I've just calculated. I tend to deal in old money, I'm afraid, so I look at feet and inches rather than metres. But it's over 26 feet long, this extension, and over 10 foot high and about 15 foot wide. That is really a huge extension on a relatively modest property with currently an outside garage stroke whatever, we didn't go inside that building, but it's a double-length garage and some. So it sort of effectively joins up the house to the garage with no external access directly to the rear garden, I guess, because of that. And to me, it just looked somewhat incongruous as a design. And I have no real reservations about agreeing with our officers, I'm afraid. I think this is too big. I think it's an inappropriate extension for the type of property that it is. And whether you have objections or not, it is, in my opinion, overmassing for the people who live next door now at some time in the future, which is what we have to bear in mind as a committee. Just because there's no objection doesn't mean to say that it's acceptable. That's a personal view. So I'm afraid to say, because I listened very closely to what you were saying, and I have great sympathy, but I have to say I agree with our officers in this instance. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I find myself kind of halfway wanting to support it, but then also following Councillor Hiller's line of it is a very, very big extension. But for me, the fact that the applicant, he's taken the time to speak with his neighbours, they haven't objected to it, he's clearly modified his plans to try and suit them. I think he had good, valid reasons for wanting the extension. Like I said, it's his family home. So I could be swayed either way, to be honest with you, on this. I was rather supportive of it at first, but then following Councillor Hiller's conversation and her comments, I find myself humming and hawing. So it'll be interesting what everyone else has to say.
Sorry, so you can't come back, I'm sorry. Councillor Hogg, yes.
I know we're in the debate stage, but is it still appropriate to ask officers a question?
If a burning question's come up, yeah.
So the question is that I know that the objection is to do with the height of the building. Is the length was the length of the building also a concern? And had you prescribed a length that you would have preferred to have seen?
Through you, Chair. Yes, it was a case of the height and the length of the extension being of concern. With regards to the recommendations that officers made, we recommended a 4 meter total length, essentially halving the proposed extension as something that would be acceptable potentially.
So it was originally 8, and then they reduced it to 7, but you would want to have seen it at 4, is that right?
Through Chair. The original submission was for a 7.2 meter extension, which was revised during the consultation period by the agent for 8 meter plans, but I did ask the agent to hold off until I made the site visit, and then I recommended that the original and the revised were too long, essentially. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I understand that that the length of this extension is quite large. I understand also the desire for the homeowner to want to stay in his current property. He likes the property, he likes the area, he gets on with his neighbours, presumably. Evidenced by the fact that the next door neighbour hasn't put any, he's from what he's saying to us, he's discussed with his neighbour about the extension, and his neighbour is in approval of it, and we certainly see no evidence of any kind of anything to the contrary from his neighbour. I think that the properties of this age, it is quite normal for a lot of them to have quite large extensions out the back, especially as the fact that the gardens do go back quite a way. So it's not as though you've kind of extended to the point that there's no garden left. There is, even with this extension, there will still be a reasonable sized garden to be had for the property. It is a very close thing as far as I'm concerned. I think the length does concern me a little bit. I'm not so bothered about the height of the building. I think I think that's something that is maybe a little bit over the line, but it's still okay. I'll be interested to hear what other people have to say specifically about the length of the extension. But at the moment, I am minded to go against officers' recommendations, but only just is the point. It's this is the reason why these applications come to us, is the fact that they are very close to that line, and it's we've heard from two councillors at the moment. It would be nice to hear what other councillors have to say on the subject. So I'm still not, I've not made it's not solidly I've not made my mind up completely, but I am leaning at the moment towards approving. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? We've only had two. Councillor Jamil.
I certainly echo what Office is saying. When I came here, I was minded that I could understand why we've come to this situation that we're in. But having heard from the applicant and understanding where he's coming from, I believe that any detrimental effect on the next door neighbour in the future, whoever buys it will know what they're buying, with what's there. It's not as if next door is selling and whoever's coming in may not know. For me, and the reasons why he's given, I am convinced that this is one where we can go against officer's recommendation. But I've got to say, when I came here, I did think that this was something that I would be going with officer recommended, but I'm now convinced that for the reasons given, it's not always so easy to move from one place to another, whereas if you've put your heart and soul into something and you want to build it into something that you want for future years, I will be minded to go against officer recommendation on this one.
Thank you. Councillor Warren, then Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at this plan, I kind of will agree with Councillor Hiller. I'm kind of in a similar situation. I understand the situation from the Speaker, but I do feel that I've got no problems with the height of this building, but the length is a serious concern. I understand the needs from Mr. Amin, but I'm mindful to go with the officer recommendation because I feel that this extension is too long for the property and for the local area. So I'm mindful to go with the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. During the site visit, I did look at it and consider the plan, and on my way here as well. So, as Councillor Jamil has said as well, at the time I was probably more towards going against it and agreeing with the officers, but after the the comments of Mr. Amin and the homeowner, and considering the area and the need for larger houses and families staying together at the moment is what seems to be happening. The height, again, the neighbours haven't complained or have an issue, and I think, as Councillor Jamil's highlighted, the house next door isn't for sale, and if someone was to move in, they would know what they're buying. So for me at the moment, I'm mindful to go against officers and go with the plan.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Anybody else? Councillor Dowson.
Can't we ask the applicant to resubmit on a scheme which is less grand than the one being submitted? We all seem to welcome the submission, but we are concerned about the size. Is that possible?
Not in this case. What's before you is what you must decide on. If you want, if you're, I can't put words into your mouth, but if you're contemplating a different size one, then you must reject this one, but that's your choice. And then obviously he's free to do that. But we can't negotiate this planning application in this meeting. Is that okay? Anybody else? Councillor Hiller.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's worth mentioning that this is one classic example of where the site visit was critical, in my opinion, to the appraisal of the potential impact of this extension. And when we were in the garden, it was obvious to me that the immediate rear garden was very narrow, and this extension effectively fills in that complete area immediately behind the house. And the height, whilst it may not concern some of the members of this committee, I think 10 foot as a height with the 26-foot length of this extension is substantial. I think it's substantial to an excess of what is considered acceptable, certainly to our planning officer. The planning officer has reiterated that his professional opinion was that a 4-metre extension was acceptable. 4 metres, that's a fair extension for that narrowness of space. The original 7.2 suggestion by the agent, as I understand now, has actually increased to 8 metres rather than listening to the planning officer. I'm not sure where we're going with this, but from my own point of view, my mind is firmly made up, maybe a lone voice, Chair, but firmly of the opinion that this extension is just too big. It's to the detriment of the house next door, and it's all very well saying, well, if they sell it, then the buyer will appreciate what is there. So, shrug shoulders. What does it really matter? I think it does matter. We've had opinion here that the next door neighbour is supportive. I didn't see that anywhere in this report. I just think there wasn't a complaint. And we don't know the tenure of the house next door. It might be rented, it might be owned, it might be so many things. But so I feel that's a little bit of a red herring, and we should be looking at the extension on its merits rather than its whether anybody next door or otherwise objects or otherwise. An objection is important. If it hasn't been objected to, then that doesn't mean to say it's not to the detriment of that plot next door. I think it's too big. I think 10 metres is 8 metres is far in excess of what it should be. So I will be supporting the officers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Sharp.
Really just a question back across to Councillor Hillier. Thank you, Chair. If the proposal was to remove the garage, would you see that, given the size, because I agree with you in terms of the comments of the size, would you then see that as overbearing? Or would we as a committee see that as overbearing?
We must be careful, because that's not on the table.
If I might, Chair,
you can.
Yeah,
but please don't let it sway your decision.
But if I just may clarify that, could that not be made a condition of approval?
No, it can't be. With respect, it's we as the Chair has just alluded, we're looking at the proposal in front of us now. I completely get where you're going with that, but I cannot answer that.
No. Effectively, that's a different, as Councillor Dowson brought up on a different thing. If you want something different, that's not this one. That has to be. That's another application altogether. We're not charged with that. Anybody else? No. Just from my point of view then as Chair, again, I appreciate it is a difficult one because we had a great address from Mr Amin, and I understand his personal reasons for wanting to do what he wants to do. Having said that, we are planning committee and we have a job to decide on these things and take both sides into account. But do the personal reasons effectively trump the planning reasons? And I'm afraid, in my opinion, they don't. I think this is too long, as Councillor has said. I think Councillor Dowson sort of touches on the fact that it would be more agreeable, or I could agree to it if it was smaller, as the officer has recommended in negotiations. The height does worry me, and certainly the impact. We saw the picture there that came up of the glass conservatory. Well, that's just going to be, to me, with an extension of 8 metres. On top of that, all these small extension that's there is going to be a real tunnel, in my view, and that conservatory is not going to be very pleasant. I just think it's too big and it's overbearing really for the neighbour, and I think the thing, if I was to recommend anything, it would be, as Councillor Dowson said, go away and come back with something a little bit more, a little smaller, that does the trick for you. So you still get some of what you want, but this is too big, and I can't agree to it. It's just too big. Anybody else? No. Does anybody want to do a proposal? Councillor Hill has a proposal.
Yeah, I'm happy to propose. It gives me no pleasure, Chair, but I'm happy to propose that we accede to our officer's recommendation for the reasons I think I've outlined. It is too big. It's you've spoke at length, Chair, very eloquently about if a proposal came forward from the applicant to reduce the massing of this extension and yet still accommodate his domestic needs, then I'm sure if it did come before this committee, which it probably would be obliged to, it may be looked at in a different light. But my proposal at the moment, Chair, is that we accept our officer's recommendation and refuse it.
Thank you, Councillor. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Warren. Okay, so we have a proposal and it's been seconded. We'll go to the vote. All those in favour of the proposal? Against? Any abstentions? One abstention. So that's six for the proposal, 4 against and 1 abstention, yeah? Is that correct? Okay. So in that case, the application is refused. Thank you. Go for the next one, when you're ready. Okay, we'll move on to the next item now, 4.3. Relates to 32 Sallows Road in Peterborough and will be presented again this time by Mrs. Band. When you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. This application at 32 Sallows Road is for a first floor side extension and also the construction of a rear dormer and the addition of 3 Velux windows to the roof to enable a loft conversion. Okay, the application slide shows you the location of the site on Sallows Road within a road that is predominantly residential. I'm going to show you some photographs now of the street scene so that you can appreciate the character of the area. This is an aerial photograph, and then if we go on to the next slide, this shows you the application site between the 2 dotted lines. It's a detached property. There is currently a gap between the application site and the neighbouring property that's used for car parking, and it lies behind the double gates. Okay, this slide shows you the character of the area, that there are a number of detached houses but also some semi-detached houses, and they are characterised by having particular gaps between each property to retain the character of the detached houses and the gaps between the semi-detached ones as well. Next slide. Again, this shows you the rhythm of the pattern of development with gaps between the houses. And the next slide shows you this in a different direction. Okay, on the next slide we see the existing floor layout plan, and it's a typical dwelling of its type that has been extended already to the rear. On the next slide you can then see how the building would be extended with a 2-storey extension to the side comprising a carport at ground floor level, but at first floor level there would be 2 rooms. The one facing to the rear would be a room for a carer, the one to the front would be for a disabled child. And then in the roof space, which is the image to the right-hand side, the loft would be converted in order to create a sensory room that would be accessed through a set of stairs. And that room would be served by Velux windows to the front and by a dormer window to the rear. The next slide will show you the elevations. So again, in the top left is the front elevation with the Velux windows in the roof space and the two-story extension to the side. And then the view to the bottom right would be the rear elevation, where you're overlooking or overmassing, because the extension would be contained within the gable elevation of the house itself. The issue is one of the impact on the character and appearance of the street scene. So in the next slide, you can see exactly where the extension would be positioned. It would fill that gap, leaving just a very small gap of 150 millimetres. So effectively, the two dwellings would appear as if they were joined together in a terraced manner. Now, as you'll see from the report, there are other examples of two-storey side extensions where terracing has occurred, and we'll come on to those. But on the next slide, just like to draw your attention to the immediate vicinity of the site, where you can see the application site in the middle, and then there are substantial gaps to the next house at number 34 on the left and to number 30 on the right-hand side. We consider that the impact of the extension would be to fill that gap, and then that would have an impact not only on the house but on the street scene. And looking at the next slide, you can see that impact to the rear. And on the next slide, that gives you a different view, showing again the gaps between the existing properties as existing, and you could envisage how that gap would be filled with the proposed extension. On the next slide, there is an extension at number 28 that effectively does that. It fills that gap. And the slide to the other side shows you the gap that's been retained to the property between number 34 and number 36. Just got a couple of slides now that show you the view to the rear. This is the rear garden area. And then what we have now is a number of slides that show you the impact of some existing two-storey side extensions within the surrounding area. I draw your attention to the late Reps paper, where the applicant has also supplied a number of photographs showing similar two-storey extensions within the Sallows Road area and slightly beyond as well. Now, we consider that these slides demonstrate the negative aspect of the extensions that have been approved in the past, as they lead to properties not being detached but being joined together in a way that detracts from the character of the area. This is one. The next slide shows another example between 41 and 43 Sallows Road, and this is particularly noticeable because of the flat roof nature of the extension. And again, there's another extension here at number 27 that has been built right to the boundary. Another example of number 15 Sallows Road. Now, this one is drawn to your attention because this extension was refused planning permission, and it was tested at appeal. The Planning Inspectorate decision notice is attached for you to your committee packs, which I'm sure you've had a look at. And I think what that really says is that the Planning Inspectorate have agreed with our officer view of the impact of such two-storey extensions on the character of the area, and they recognise the adverse impact that's already been incurred to the area by means of previous extensions. Those previous extensions were all granted before this appeal decision. We feel this appeal decision marks something of a watershed, and that while there may have been previous extensions, they have had a negative impact. We don't wish to see that continue, and therefore we are taking a more consistent view in refusing such applications from this application in 2019 forward, in order to take decisions in a consistent way. That's the end of the presentation. I would also draw your attention to a statement from Councillor Yassin, who was not able to attend the committee today. Councillor Yassin is supporting the applicant. She considers that his site extension would be similar to others that have been granted in the area. Doesn't feel that it would have any impacts on residents to the rear at Grimshaw Road, and also draws your attention to the special needs of the applicant's son and the purpose of the extension in order to create better accommodation and a sensory room for him. That argument has also been considered in the planning application report before you. Section D relates to personal circumstances. We are aware that the application is for a disabled child. I believe, members, you've also already received a doctor's note that has been submitted. We consider that such personal circumstances can be taken into account, but only if there's a valid and justifiable reason for it. I would note that this is an extension that would create accommodation at the first floor and within the roof space. So we put less weight on that. So really, in conclusion, our recommendation is that the application be refused because of its unacceptable impact on the character and appearance of the site and the surrounding area, and because it would lead to the infilling of a visual gap that forms an important aspect of the historical development pattern of this street. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Bland. Okay, firstly we have a ward councillor, Councillor Shaz Nawaz, please, to address committee. Good afternoon, Councillor Nawaz.
Good afternoon.
You have 10 minutes to address committee when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much, committee. First and foremost, I'd like to pass on Councillor Yassin's apology. Unfortunately, she's tested positive for COVID and therefore can't be here today. Second, the applicant has prepared a lengthy statement, and his preference is that I read his statement, and so I've agreed to do that. I'll be reading it as written, and it was passed on to me earlier today, so I hope you'll bear with me. I'm appealing this decision on of the planning officer to refuse my planning application for the following reasons. Firstly, by way of background, I have 4 children, and at the moment we have 2 rooms which we share between all of us. One of my child has a disability with special needs, and a doctor's letter has been provided, and it suggests that the older the child gets, the more challenging his condition will be. I have forwarded this letter to the officer. This is the reason for the application to build an extension. The planning officer has informed me that the authority does not consider personal circumstances. Where a local authority does not consider personal circumstances, who do I go to then? As you will be aware, the local authority has a duty to consider whether a decision, policy or practice has a negative impact on a disabled person, which in my respectful submission the authority is failing to do when dealing with my application. I've seen that the case officer report for planning committee at page 6 paragraph 7 states that I have not provided any supporting documents in relation to my disabled child for specific needs. However, clearly I have received emails from Mrs. Shahida on the 17th of May and another email from Mrs. Louise Simmons on the 26th of May in reply to my emails saying clearly we do not consider personal circumstances, and I have provided copies of those emails to the planning committee. I initially applied for first floor side extension and loft conversion and 3 front dormer windows back in February. By the end of March, a lot of my neighbours grouped together and objected my application on exactly the same grounds. I am aware that they are family, friends and relatives. What is more, following my application, I was subjected to bullying and harassment each time I encountered them on the street due to my planning application. The bullying is not one-off and has happened before, and there was another similar application at the same time, just across the road from me, and none of them have made any comments or objections, which clearly shows a dislike they have towards me. Mid of April, we had a visit from a case officer to our property. I was told by her that the LPA are concerned about first floor side extension. I was advised that front dormers are not acceptable, as no one has front dormers on the street, but she said the decision had not yet been made. On the 29th of April, my architect received an email from the planning officer saying that we would not accept your application and suggested providing amended drawings. I was really disappointed and called the case officer to discuss what I can do to obtain approval. She advised me to remove the front dormer windows and replace with Velux style windows, and if I set back the side extension from the front and bring the roof ridge down from existing roof, this will make the extension subordinate. She has also sent me some recommendations, examples via email, and said if I can revise my drawings and submit them to the council, they will look at them again. I did this, and they were sent back on the 5th of May. However, my application was still refused by the local authority, which in my respectful submission is completely unfair and unreasonable. According to the council, my side extension infill, the gap between the two properties, which will be out of character of the road seen, which goes against council LP 17. I completely disagree with this and would like to challenge it for the following reasons. There are numerous examples of this on the road itself. Number 39 Sallows Road and a property and our property have submitted the application at the same time for a similar project, but 39 Sallows Road has been granted planning permission last month because no neighbours have objected and ours has been refused. Number 28, just one door away from us, exactly the same extension as our application, as is the case with number 43 across the road. The list goes on. Sallows Road, we have a total of 86 houses, out of which 35 houses have a side extension. And same on Grimshaw Road, there is about 56 houses there, and out of 56, 26 houses have a side extension. I have provided pictures of the extensions on Sallows Road and Grimshaw Road. There are properties, for example, number 71, 77, 79, 81, 50, 52, 54, 56, which have been granted, as well as other numerous applications granted in surrounding similar areas. I would refer you to the following: Perville Road, Mayfield Road, Mares Walk, Grange Road, Delamere Close, Pennine Way, Maynell Walk, Perville Road, Linton Road. The applicant's given me the planning application numbers, but I assume I don't need to share those with you, Chair. Coming back to Sallows Road, according to the national guidelines and LPA, if you step back and lower the roof ridge line, it does not create a terracing effect. For example, property number 43 Sallows Road, the planning officer in his report referred to the design and impact on the character and appearance of the street scene and the surrounding area. The report stated the proposed two-story extension would use matching materials, would be set back, and from the host dwelling would therefore be subservient. This stepping back of the extension would slightly reduce the impact in relation to terracing. Furthermore, the report states that given the number of very similar extensions within Sallows Road and the wider area, it is considered that in this instance, on the balance side extension would be difficult to resist. I can see Mrs. Shahida reporting for Planning Committee. She is referring to 43 Sallows Road, which has been granted before the 15 Sallows Road appeal determined in 2019. But I would like to highlight that 43 has revised the drawings and resubmitted in July 2020 and was still granted. Number 39 Sallows Road, which was granted last month, the case officer report clearly states that the surrounding area in which the site is located already sees extensions of various sizes. Due to the extension precedence of two-story extensions as well as the rear extensions in place, this proposal is not deemed to be out of character for the site or the surrounding area. The same applies to my application. During the application process, I contacted the local authority on many occasions and provided them with so many references where planning has been granted, but each time I have been told every application has its own merits. In my submission, the merits in my application have not been fully considered, and I have simply been treated in a like manner to number 15 Sallows Road, which has been refused by the council. My application should have been considered on its own merits, in the words of the council officer themselves, as opposed to being treated the same to one application which has been refused. In fact, the inspector confirms that her judgments on the aesthetic merits are subjective. Further, my application can be distinguished from number 15 in the following ways. Number 1, the roof at number 15 is significantly higher than the ridge line of the adjacent property at number 13, so the proposed side extension would more effectively close the gap between the two properties, as it will be set much higher than number 13. This is clear with reference to the proposed elevations that accompany the application at number 15. This is not the case with my application. Number 2, the proposed side extension at number 15 was to go right up to the party wall with number 13, which closed the gap between the two properties, but in my application there will be a small gap retained between numbers 32 and 34, minimizing the terracing effect. Number 3, number 15 and number 13 have the same level from the front, whereas number 32 is set back from number 34 by more than half a meter, which makes the house more subservient, and plus side extension is going to be further set back, which is clearly reducing the terracing effect. Number 4, the proposed side extension at number 32 keeps the gap at ground floor level, which is a fundamental difference to the development at number 15. For these reasons, in my submission, my application clearly has more merits than number 15. In any event, since the appeal has been dismissed, 12 Grimshaw Road, Council has granted that two-storey side extension on Grimshaw Road back in 2020, and a few others. I would like to highlight specifically two of these. Firstly, Dogthorpe Road, application number 2100122 HHFUL has been granted a side extension.
Sorry to interrupt, there's 30 seconds left.
Similar to mine back in May 2021, thank you Dan, there was a medical report provided to support the application, where I have asked the planning officer if I can provide a medical report for our son. She advised that the council does not consider personal circumstances, as I mentioned before. However, for that application, the medical report was considered and the application was granted on that basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Nawaz. I also have the applicant, Mr Anwar. Did you want to come forward at all? Oh, yeah. I'll ask them, yeah. Before I move on, I do apologise. I've skipped a little bit there. Do you have any questions, anybody, on committee for Councillor Nawaz before I move on? You do. Councillor Hiller. Councillor Nawaz, would you come back to the table for us?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Councillor Nawaz, do you think, let me couch this in different terms, is it your considered opinion that the personal circumstances of an applicant should override embedded planning policy?
I think, as one of the officers said earlier, that personal circumstances sometimes are taken into consideration, and having served on the planning committee, Councillor Hiller, I know at certain occasions we have taken those circumstances into consideration. In fact, I recall an application, I believe it was in Castor, where the officer suggested that we should not grant planning permission, and the lady made a very emotional and moving appeal because her mother had cancer, and we considered the grounds for that particular circumstance, and the planning was approved. But above and beyond that, that is one of the reasons being stated by the applicant, Councillor Hiller. There are, as he states, best part of 30 odd other houses there who have had planning permission in the past. And if I may, Chair, it's a kind of a personal gripe of mine to some extent that either we should be consistent from day one and not allow anybody planning, or if we do, then we need to be consistent by ensuring that we follow our initial precedent, because the challenge for this applicant and for other councillors being sat here today is, one of the reasons we're given is, well, the next door neighbour or somebody across the street or somebody around the corner was granted planning permission, so why can't I? And as subjective as that may be, it's still a bone of contention on part of the applicant, Councillor Hiller, that sometimes we need to take into consideration. So forgive the lengthy response, but I hope I've addressed your question.
So that'll be a no then, which is fine. That's good. Or maybe I've read that wrongly. Maybe you agree that personal circumstances should override planning policy in certain circumstances. And these things are all, I haven't finished. These things are always subjective, of course. I completely get that. Sorry, Chair, if I might just correct you. That application wasn't within my ward. It was actually in Barnock ward. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yes, if you want to answer.
Yes, I would.
I'm not debating, it's questions. So, you know, what was the question? Councillor, did you have a question? Right, okay, so there's no question. But go if you've got a burning reason to answer it.
Well, I have, because the Councillor Hill said that I stated that no personal circumstances should not be taken into consideration. That's not what I've said. I've said the officer has said personal circumstances can and do and are taken into consideration. I've given an example of that. So I think on this particular case, we should take the personal circumstances into consideration, Chair.
Thank you. You made yourself very clear.
If I might, Chair, I didn't actually say that.
Okay.
I did say that you suggested that personal consideration should be taken into account. I did say that.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, right, we're going to move on now to Mr. Oh, sorry. Another question, Councillor Hogg.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the point that you made about where planning permission has been maybe given in the past, that we should continue to do so. Do you not agree that actually things change, that policies change, that what was acceptable 20, 30, 40 years ago may not now be acceptable in terms of planning permission, and that so therefore that precedent doesn't always have a case to answer in terms of and that this is the reason why we have to look at each application on its own merits and not specifically what's gone on before.
Well, I totally agree to some extent, Councillor Hogg, and I hope you'd agree I'm not a dinosaur where I feel that something that was done 30 or 40 years ago should be adhered to now. Of course, it depends on the circumstances, but some of the examples that the applicant, Mr. Anwar, has given are more recent in the last 3, 5, 7 years. The wider point I was making was that perhaps as a council we should have considered this in the first place and said, well, if applicants are applying for planning permission in this particular area and the site extension will create some kind of a terraced effect, we should have been clear then and we should have granted planning permission. Now you and I and the committee members here and all the councillors can't go back and change that. What I am saying is there's quite a few who have been granted planning permission. I can't see how that's adversely affected the area. In fact, I don't get any complaints whatsoever about any of those applications or from their neighbours going forward. Therefore, having one more, I don't think will have an adverse effect in my personal opinion.
Okay. Right, finally, thank you, Councillor Nawaz. Right, we'll move on then to Mr. Anwar. Mr. Anwar, you have 5 minutes if you wish to address committee when you're ready.
First of all, thank you very much all for listening to me, and thank you very much for Councillor Shaz. He has all he said what I wanted to really say within 5 minutes, which I couldn't really say. I've got a few points left which I wanted to speak. I wanted to come to your point first. What you're saying is what the planning saying is the past, but I have given you numerous of examples which have been granted in 2021, 2020, which is Grimshaw Road, and what I'm talking about Sellers Road 39, which has been granted just across the road last month. Me and him applied it on the same time, which he was granted and I was refused. And there's another example on a house on Silver Road, reference number 201490HHFUL, which has been granted in 18 February 2021. The structure is exactly the same as mine, the same side extension as mine, and they are building right up to the party wall, which completely close the gap between number 19 and number 17. And they have gone further from existing building from the rear, so which I'm not doing it. I'm just completing where the existing building is. But Silver Road, that's what my point is. Silver Road is less than a mile from the Sellers Road, the Peterborough City Council policy LP16 applies equally to Silver Road and it does to Sellers Road as well. So I would ask then, how is the policy being applied more strictly in my application? In my conclusion, I simply applied for a planning permission to accommodate my disabled child and make his life quality better. But I was first bullied and harassed by my neighbours for making this application, and it appears to me that the council has attached too much weight to their objection to an application which does have a merit. Therefore, considering all the factors I have mentioned, the discussion to refuse in my submission is unfair and unreasonable and a negative impact on a disabled person. I would therefore request the council to reconsider and grant this application for all this reason I have mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anwar. Any questions at all, please? Mr. Anwar? Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Mr. Anwar, and thank you very much for your address. Councillor Shaz Nawaz read a speech. I mean, whose speech was that? Was that yours or was it somebody else's? Because I wanted to ask a question relating to that speech.
Yeah, it was mine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now, in your address, I'll say that way, you've mentioned that your child's best interests were not taken into account by the council. Now, my understanding is that the local authority are duty bound. They have to take the best interests of the child into account. Why did you come to that conclusion that the authority did not take them into account? Why?
Because I have sent emails to case officer Shahida and Louise Simon, her OC team line. I've got those emails. I forgot to be honest with you, I forgot to give it to her. I've got all emailed those. If you wanted to look at it, they completely said it's going to be, well, we don't really consider. I've told actually Mrs. Shahida, she has seen my son. So she was saying that I've got a similar son. So I told her, you better understand me that what's the situation is. So, but the replies to those emails, they clearly said we're not going to consider the personal circumstances. Actually, Louise said it's going to be override straight away.
Okay, you got another one, yeah?
Thank you. Right, so from your understanding or how you feel that the local authority didn't take the best interests of your child into account. Now, if I put this to you that the local authority are saying, or the planning department are saying that what you're asking for in terms of an extension doesn't serve the purpose for your child, what's your comment on that?
I would ask that how can not, because at the minute I've got 2 bedrooms and I've got 4 kids. We are sharing all of our 2 bedrooms, so we don't have enough space. My child, like I said, I mentioned before, his condition is going to be worse, and it's just started to happen now. So we're going to have to fit a lot of equipment, medical equipment, so from lifting from the beds, coming from the downstairs, taking to the toilets, all the equipment. Well, to be honest with you, the doctor was saying for us a long time, they've been saying that we're going to do it now, we're going to do it now. But obviously, as a father, obviously I didn't want to, I didn't want to see these things. I wanted to my son, obviously. But unfortunately, we're going to have to do those. For those things, obviously, if we obviously make a separate bedrooms for him, those are the equipment's going to go there.
Yes, certainly.
You said you've got 4 children.
Yeah.
Yes. What is the ages of the children?
The oldest one is 18. Then I've got 15. Then I've got 11, which is a disabled son. Then I've got a 5-year-old daughter.
Okay. Yep. Any further questions? Councillor Hall.
So when we were at the site visit, I was told by the officer that they had made some suggestions in terms of changes that would still achieve what you were looking for as far as they were concerned, but that you'd kind of gone ahead with the plans as submitted. Can you just kind of outline what those changes were and why you felt that they didn't presumably match your requirements?
Initially, what I said is applied for a planning obviously side extension with a 3-front dormer, and the front, obviously the side extension, it was like right to the boundary of the front elevation. But the recommendation I got from the case officer, she recommended me step back a bit from the front elevation ridge the roof down, take the front dormer out, which I was happy to do it, which I did, which I've been refused on. There's no other suggestion I've been made. That's the recommendation. She sent it to me through email as well, which I followed that.
What were those changes? And you know, what were the changes essentially?
I believe that a number of changes were discussed at different times during the application. I think that at one point it was discussed as to whether a single-storey extension might be suitable on the site to overcome the issues of the terracing effect and to provide the kind of accommodation that appeared to be required. I believe that also there was a request that the first floor part of the extension be set back from the front in order to reduce any terracing effect. And that's in addition to the request to remove the front dormers. So my understanding is that only the front dormer element was amended, but not the other aspects of the changes that were proposed.
Okay, so it's essentially it has been set back a little bit, but not enough in the opinion of officers.
No, I don't believe that any setback has been actually shown on the amended plans.
It's not massive, but it is set back from the plans.
If it is at a minuscule amount that wouldn't actually overcome any terracing effect.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jamil.
Something you said earlier about that case that was appealed and the planning inspectorate then made a ruling on it, and you called it a watershed moment. You said that was back in 2018 or something, yet we're still hearing that these type of planning applications that come into, we're still giving permission for them to go ahead. I don't understand that. And if we then got a ruling and we're going to be consistent in what we do, so we stop all of them, yet we're still giving permission for people to build on the side and have double-storey extension as long as they're slightly set back. Am I missing something here? Or?
Yeah, I believe that the two cases that the applicant mentioned, the one at number 39 that was granted permission earlier in the year, that did differ from this case. It's on the opposite side of the road where the properties are more of a semi-detached nature than detached. But also that did include a 835mm gap between the side of the extension and the next door property, so they weren't joined together in the way that's being proposed. And also the roof design was different. It was a hipped roof, and therefore the extension created a lower level of roof than what is being proposed here. So there were different circumstances. And I think the other one that was mentioned that had been approved before the appeal decision, but then came back in again after it. Clearly, we have to take into account the previous, very recent decision that was made, particularly if the nature of the amended scheme is very similar to the one on the previous scheme, then it would be unreasonable to refuse it so soon after the previous permission if the differences between the two were very, very slight. So I think there are, it's why we always advise that cases have to be treated on their merits, because there can be different sets of circumstances at play in different applications. So for example, you may have one house that's further back than another house, or the roof design may be different, or they could be set apart by different distances, and similarly the proposed two-storey side extensions can vary in their design. They may leave a gap, or they may be set back by a certain distance, or have again a different roof design, and that can make all the difference. Yeah.
Chair, if I just so for you to say a watershed moment it's not exactly true, because every case is decided on its merits. So just because a decision was made on one doesn't mean it's going to be the same for the others.
I think we always have to treat each case on its merits, but I think that appeal decision, I suppose, signalled that some of the extensions that had been granted before had made a change to the overall character and appearance of the area, and that accumulated change over time had now sort of reached an extent where it was having an impact on the character, and then therefore it was eroding that original character, and any further extensions would then exacerbate that. So we felt that if to carry on approving more extensions without addressing the terracing effect would have a significant change on the area, and therefore shouldn't be approved if they didn't mitigate in that way.
Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you. The applicant in his address has given a lot of examples of properties of similar nature who have been granted permission. What do you have to say to that? I mean, is that the case, what you're saying?
Yeah. I suppose that's a bit similar to the other councillor's question about the sort of consistency of decision making. So there have been other two-storey extensions that have been granted in the past. I think that some of them, if they had been submitted now, we definitely wouldn't be granting permission. For example, I think you've seen some examples of flat-roofed extensions on properties that have a hipped roof. So, you know, that is something that was approved in the past that we really wouldn't be doing now. And, you know, similarly, there have been other examples where extensions have been allowed and built that have created a terracing effect, and now that we've seen that effect happening and how it's affected the character of this area, again, we wouldn't be so keen to allow that. We would try to seek amendments to the design to create a gap or to set the first floor of the extension back in order to improve the relationship between the properties and the character of the area.
Yes, please.
Final question. I asked a question to the applicant regarding the child's best interest to be considered by the local authority. Now, he doesn't seem to be satisfied. Now, as a human rights lawyer, I know Section 55 of 2009 Act says that all local authorities have to take into account the best interest of the child as a primary consideration. I'm sure you have. Now, looking at your report, I'm not that convinced that it's been looked into. Now, is it a failure on the applicant side that they failed to provide you the necessary documents for you to make a proper decision, a proportionate decision? I mean, it's a fact that as a disabled child, it does make this case quite exceptional and unique in that sense. What are your views about that?
I think at the time that the report was written, you can see on page 54, we didn't have the supporting documents that outlined the medical requirements, except now that under the late items, we've now received that information. So at the time we wrote the report, we didn't have the information. We do have it now, and therefore that's before the committee, and that's something that you can take into account. I suppose as long as you feel that they are, as we describe, you know, valid and justifiable reasons, and that those reasons relate to what's being proposed. So you need to look at both the reasons and the nature of this application, and that you feel that the two tie up together. Yeah.
Just a cheeky question. You've read the report, haven't you? Have you ever looked at the report, yeah? If that report was before you, what would your opinion be?
Careful.
Well, I suppose I think you need to, as the committee, look at the nature of the reasons that are set out there, and I think issues around wheelchair access, provision of a lift within the dwelling. It's whether those sorts of things you feel are borne out in the application and therefore would justify the use of personal circumstances. Yeah.
Could I just ask a question now, while we're on that particular subject, and I could ask your opinion on this, I'm sure I can, is that the problem appears to be that this is a two-storey build. In your opinion, would there be an acceptable compromise? I'm not saying we're going to change anything here, that it could have been done on a single story effect, so effectively two rooms back to back type thing rather than one on top of the other. Is that something that could have happened?
I mean, I guess there's lots of ways of extending a property, and I believe that a single-storey extension was one of the things that was discussed. I mean, clearly it needs to be the applicant that puts forward amended plans, and they may have their reasons why a single storey wasn't acceptable, but I believe that would have been an option available.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No? Should we go to debate then? Who wants to start that? Councillor Hogg, he's keen to start that.
So, I have every sympathy for the applicant. I think that they should get a permission for an extension that meets their needs, and clearly those needs are really quite serious. However, we're back in this situation where what we see before us is what we see before us, and we have to make a decision on that basis. I'm not entirely convinced that there isn't a solution that can be found that will be able to go through, that will get officers' approval. I feel that, as has been said, in terms of maybe stepping it back slightly more to stop that terracing effect, to look at just a ground floor extension that is able to provide the accommodation that the applicant is looking for to meet their needs. I think there's a lot of room for more negotiation, is the point. And I think that essentially this needs to be looked at again. It needs to be resubmitted with those negotiations having been concluded, hopefully agreeably, and that they can then move forward with their project to get the house extended to meet their needs. So on this occasion, I am going to support officers' recommendations to refuse, but on the basis that I feel that it's not a refusal as in I don't think you should have an extension. I just think that there's some more work that needs to be done, and I don't think there's a huge amount of work really when it boils down to it. I think it's a few details that need to be ironed out between officers and the applicant, and I think they could then go forward.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. Anybody else? Councillor Hiller? Yep, sorry, your hand.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and through you. I absolutely, completely, sorry to use those superlatives, with Councillor Hogg. Yes, there is an extension there of a design, I'm sure, which would suit the needs of this family. Again, we've listened to an impassioned address from the applicant about his circumstances, the family's circumstances, his child's circumstances, as to why this should be approved. I asked Councillor Nawaz whether he thought personal circumstances sort of overcome planning policy, and he's absolutely right, and I completely agree with him that it depends on the circumstances, but it also depends on the proposal that's before us. And I think that this terracing effect, and much was mentioned about previous applications that have been approved, it sets precedent, yes, but there comes a point when that cumulative effect in this, let's not forget, and I have to say, Chair, it was a very good opportunity for a site visit, because it certainly, to me, gave me the overall impression of a tree-lined avenue of detached houses, semi-detached houses. It was very pleasant. Didn't seem to be any parking issues at all. It was a very pleasant road. I wouldn't like to see further terracing effect that this proposal would make happen. We have an appeal decision. I printed it off this morning. It's quite the shortest, briefest appeal decision that I've ever seen, and I have to say I've seen many. And the inspector is unequivocal in his opinion. Her opinion. The similar extension was refused. It should obviously be refused in accord with this dismissed appeal, and I see no reason at this juncture to go against the officer's recommendation. But I reiterate, and I'm just buying into what Councillor Hogg has said, there is an extension here waiting to happen. It just isn't this extension, in my opinion. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. When I first looked at this application, had it been any other circumstances, an application of this sort, I would have totally agreed with the officer's recommendation. As has been mentioned, it's a tree-lined street, so some of that effect of terracing is hidden. I've driven down that street many a time because of some friends that live there, and I've not really ever noticed or maybe taken note of, you know, which houses have an extension and which don't. During this, talk, I've numerous times I've heard people talk about circumstances and the merit of the application, and I think the circumstances in this application outweigh, the need for a refusal. My personal experiences having children that have disability, cystic fibrosis, I sort of can see where this application's going. Applicant has been going through, and the long-term impact of a child and their deteriorating condition does affect a parent, and obviously every parent wants to provide the best for their child. We're talking about maybe they bring another application forward, but looking at the space they have and considering the needs, if they were to extend in the back, into the back, as was discussed on the site visit, it would reduce their outside space. But also for me, from personal experience, I try to show my children equality regardless of disability, and to ask, to put one child in a rear extension at the back of a house, away from the others just because of their condition, would be, for me personally, showing them again a difference. So going forward, I'm sure they will need lifts and other aids as well. So the size is important, and the roof space is the only way they can access that roof space from what I've seen from the plans, is by having a side extension and making use of that space in the best manner. There was also, it was mentioned about terracing. From looking at the plans and the drawings, it looks like this drawing is set back, the extension is set back and the roof line is slightly lower. So, it should reduce that effect. So me, for one, I think I would again go against officer recommendations just because of the special circumstances of this application in this instance.
Thank you. Councillor Jamil.
Another difficult one. I've been a councillor now, it's second stint, for 11 years, and dealing with planning officers, it's always been but it was made when I wasn't here or whatever. There is no consistency in planning. What we get through now, we may not have got through years ago, but then it's the other way around. It works both ways. Because of this, in Parkwood especially, where you do have with these 3-bedroom semis, and I've spoken to people who've said to me, look, they've managed to do the extension, it's level with the rest of the house, and then others where there's pushback. So there is a lot of inconsistency. I think that's the first thing we've got to admit. For me, here we have personal circumstances where we have a disabled child and we're looking to the needs of the disabled child here. Now, alternatively, we could have had a letter here from Care and Repair wanting to do it. Would we still be making the same arguments had we done? Or if Dial or any of the disabled charities had written a letter in, would we still be having the same thing? For me, we have a father here who's looking to make life as comfortable for his son as possible. With what he believes going into the future will be what's required. And I know we have planning policies, but we are here as a committee to also balance that with the needs of our residents. And I think in this case, the needs of that disabled child slightly, in my opinion, outweigh what the planning needs are. And therefore, I will be voting against officer recommendation on this one.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. With due respect to my fellow councillors, Councillor Hogg and Councillor Hiller, I've been a councillor for many years, and it's been very rare that, especially Councillor Hiller, whenever he needs to sum up or he gives reasoning, are very thorough and plausible, with due respect. But on this occasion, Councillor Hiller, I don't know why, you failed to address the issue of disability. We have a child here who's disabled, and statutorily the authority is bound to consider the circumstances. The applicant has forwarded the relevant information. I think that's a very important issue that we should, as a committee in our debate, that should be discussed. Because I believe that this case, the disability element makes it exceptional, right? It makes it personal that we need to look into. So you're not making any comments on that. I don't know why, but normally you're very thorough. But again, that's my observation. Again, with Councillor Hogg, you're quite thorough as well in your debate, and you've not touched on a very important issue, which I think is very important in this appeal. Now, looking at it in a subjective manner, I mean, obviously, there have been cases where Highway have objected on matters, and officers have looked at it in a subjective manner, in the round, and they said, yes, we could, get away with it. My response submission or debate, what I would say is that we need to look at this matter in the round, in a subjective manner. And the key element that we need to consider, that we've got a child who's disabled. As rightly Councillor Jamil has said, if Care and Repair to take this matter on, and they've got to make an application, we would have given more weight to that. In this incident, the father is taking that role. The father is taking that role to spend the money and make a sort of a pleasant environment for the child. So what I would say that from my point of view, looking at in the round and hearing the applicant and hearing the councillors supporting the application, I am minded to go against the officer's recommendation personally on the basis that we've got a child who's disabled, who've submitted the information, and it outweighs the other factors. Say, for example, you've raised a terrorist effect, but we've got a child who's disabled. Yes, it needs to be served. Now, yes, it does give a terrorist effect, but how terrorist effect does it give? How effective is it? What's the stage of the terrorist effect? So I personally think in the round, it outweighs all these factors that we are discussing, the child disability. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg and Councillor Hiller.
Yeah, I just wanted to really sort of come back on those comments. In no way, shape or form have I ignored the personal circumstances of this application. I thought I was fairly clear that the applicant should have an extension. I just feel that there is more room for some negotiation to get an acceptable solution for both parties. That's not something that we can do here as this committee. We can't negotiate. We can't say, well, maybe it needs to be stepped back another foot or another 18 inches or whatever it happens to be. And, even though it will then extend towards the back. I'm not an architect, so I don't know what the implications of that would be. But I feel that it needs to be looked at again, and a solution that works for everybody. If it was the case that this was the only solution that was workable, and I felt that that there was nowhere else to go, then I would probably be supporting, go against it in terms of the terracing. But I think there is no need to allow this application in its current form, because I think that there is a solution that will be acceptable for all parties. So it's not a question of, no, you can't have it, go away, it's not going to happen, it's never going to happen. I think completely opposite to that. And actually what it should be is, yes, this should absolutely happen, but not quite in its current form. And as we've kind of already alluded to on other applications with this, we can't say, well, what about if you make it 5 metres long? With the last application, would that be okay? I think, again, this is one of those occasions where we're having to reject it on the basis that we need to come back at it and then just tweak it slightly more so that it can then be acceptable for everybody. Thank you.
Councillor Hiller.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, I completely concur with Councillor Hogg's comments, and I suggest if I didn't know you better, I would take offence at what you just said, in that both Councillor Hogg and myself, as long-standing members of this committee, dismiss disability. Absolutely, irrefutably not. And that's not what either Councillor Hogg or myself said. The extension to this property, going up into the loft, is not an issue with our planning officers. The rear dormers, not an issue with our planning officers. The issue is the terracing effect of this property. You said, well, terracing, it was almost a shrug of the shoulders. What difference does that make? Well, there's a little tiny gap between these two properties, between the one next door and the one that's wants to be extended. It is a terracing effect. It is a cumulative effect, which I think shouldn't be allowed. There is an extension. I think I said several times, there is an extension here waiting to happen, just not this one. The design is poor. It looks contrived. It is a terracing effect in a residential verdant almost avenue, and we shouldn't allow this. Our officers have recommended that the terracing effect is unacceptable. The inspectorate, the government inspectorate for a similar property, not a million miles away, number 15, said that it's completely unacceptable, and that was an irrevocable, can't think of the word I used. Anyway, the decision was absolutely spot on from an inspector's point of view. So to suggest that disability of a child is being ignored is very, very wide of the mark. And I would hope in the near future, perhaps you'll retract that statement, because that I found quite objectionable, to be honest. So that's all I have to say, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Iqbal.
With due respect, Councillor Hiller, if I could respond to you, you didn't. From my point of view, I think you failed to give sufficient weight to that. I'm not saying that you disregarded it, but no comment or weight was given to. From my point of view, I mean that's my opinion. That's what I will say to that.
Okay. Yes, certainly can.
If I might, Jay, you also said about care and repair, and your intimation, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but your intimation was if it was a care and repair issue, what would be the first? I can't remember the last time care and repair did a 2-storey extension to a property, so I'm not sure that care and repair would actually get involved in this type of application.
Anybody else want to join the debate? No? No, I think it's all been said really. I'm not going to add any more. I actually I have to agree with Councillor Hogg and Councillor Hiller and go with our officers. I think you're right, Councillor Hiller's exactly right, Councillor Hogg's exactly right. This needs an extension, but unfortunately this terracing is not the one. So I think it needs to go back to the drawing board again and come up with the right idea. And I think it would be pretty well supported. So I think there's more negotiation, as you say, or a new drawing, with new drawings, and find a way through. I mean, that's what we want to do. The father did a very passionate speech and talk, and everybody must totally understand that, Councillor. We must. You can't not feel for that, you know. Any of our children that were ill, we in some way needed help, we would do all we could, and that's exactly what we should do. It should go back. It should do everything they can to get it right and get it built. But it's not this terrorist effect, I'm afraid, in this case. Not in my view, anyway. Right. Anybody else want to come in, or do I go for a proposal?
Chair, can I just
Yeah, go on.
Some of what's been said today is like this whole terracing effect. Are we inadvertently saying that any new applications that come in that are almost vaguely terracing 3-bedroom semis, that the officers should refuse them?
It has to be on, in my view, it has to be on, as we keep saying, on every individual. It has to be what it looks like. Now, those that went on the site visit, and this is why I always go on about it, if you didn't go, you couldn't take into account how that felt. And that's why I always push site visits, because you need to look at it and think, because there's no other way of seeing that impact. And we saw on the pictures there, even though the pictures showed the house in the middle effectively and the two either side with a gap in between, to stand and look and then actually go and have a look at the ones that are already been done, which has been brought up as an argument, you'll see most of them don't look very nice at all, and they should never have happened, but that's what it is. So actually we're quite lucky that this is, in one way, this isn't the first one in my view. The other ones show it shouldn't have been done. This is another one, and I think we shouldn't do another one. That's my view. But everything has to be done on its own merits at the end of the day, and I think in this case the pictures were clear. If you've gone on site visits, in my view, to block one of those gaps effectively would be the wrong thing to do, and come up with another plan, because I'm sure it can be done. Anybody else? No? Do I go proposal then? Anybody going to propose? Anything? Oh, can't see it. Sorry, I didn't see any hands. I do apologise. I must have missed you. Yes, we've got a proposal. Nobody else has got a hand up.
I think emotions might be running high on this particular application, Chair. However, on the basis of what has been discussed, on the basis of our officer's report, I will propose that we accept the officer's recommendation and refuse the application. Thank you, for the reasons outlined.
Seconder. Anybody going to second that? Councillor Hogg, seconding. Okay, we have a valid proposal and it's been seconded, so we'll go to the vote. So on the proposal, all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? None, is there? Okay, so that proposal, it's 5, 4, 6 against and no abstentions, so that proposal is defeated. Do I have any other proposals, please? Councillor Jamil? Could you use your mic for me?
I propose that we go against officer recommendation on this one and go with the proposal as it is.
Okay. Do you have a seconder?
Just ask for conditions as well.
Yeah, okay. You want some conditions on that one, do you? Okay, we're just going to go through some of the conditions to make sure you're happy as part of your proposal.
Okay, Councillor Jamil, I'm sure you'd want that any planning permission be granted with conditions in order to make it lawful. So the standard ones would be the time commencement condition, the approved plans, and materials to match the dwelling. Okay.
Yes, I agree with that.
You're content with that? Yeah. Seconder on that? Councillor Iqbal? Okay, again, we've got a valid proposal and it's been seconded, so we'll go to the vote. So all those in favour? And those against? And there's no abstentions, I assume, from that. So that's 6 for, 5 against and no abstentions. So in that case, the application is approved. Thank you very much. Right. Okay, thank you. That's the end of the meeting as such. Thank you very much for your time today on a very hot day. Thank you to officers and for all the support team in the background made that happen in the end. And thank you for those on YouTube and the press who joined us today. And we'll see you next time and have a good afternoon.